Hello, I want to welcome you to the Power of Our Story. We are a community where veterans and first responders and all protectors can connect and share their experiences and heal together. So, this talk is going to be facilitated by Richard Doc Sprunger, who is a former Navy SEAL and current firefighter who has spent over 3 decades in service, first protecting lives, now transforming them. After years of leading under pressure and walking through personal trauma, Richard discovered that true strength is found in connection, not silence. As a leadership and resilience coach, he helps veterans, first responders, and high achievers rediscover purpose, belonging, and healing through his VALUESHIP framework and his upcoming book, The Journey Home. His message, we've all been through fire, but healing begins when we realize we don't have to walk through the ashes alone, anchors his work. So, Richard, thank you for facilitating our talk today.
No, thank you, and thanks for the lovely introduction. You always make me feel better about myself than I do some days. It's funny. Chat GPT can do that as well. I remember one day I was having a bad day, and I went to chat, and it knows everything about me, has all my bios from some of the work that I do with it. And I said, I'm feeling down. Can you write me a letter to feel good about myself? And it wrote me this huge letter, and I was pumped after I read it. I read it to my best friend, and he goes, "Oh, you must feel really good about yourself." I was like, you know what, I do, doggone it. But no, thanks again for the kind words. And I think you nailed my mission statement to a T of what I want to do, and the impact I want to have is just letting people know that they're not alone. And what's funny about that is even the protectors sometimes we forget that we're not alone. And I've been feeling a lot of that lately myself personally, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. But for those that do end up having to watch this on a recording, a little bit about me, like Sarah said, and thanks to the power of our story and given uh, a format, a place for us to have these conversations and have these stories and have these interactions that can potentially bring healing, whether you show up live like we are right now, or whether you catch it on a recording. It's an amazing platform for people just to be seen and witnessed. So I thank you for allowing me to be part of that. Yay. And as far as my story goes, really it started in, I've said this multiple times, back in 1982 when I was 12 years old, waiting to go roller skating with the church group, but my dad had to take me and he never came home. He ended up being taken from us by a drunk driver. And that was my first interaction with real loss and also nervous system trauma and dysregulation and PTSD and the things that when you're 12, you have no idea what they are. And I didn't know what they were until you fast forward 12, 13, 14 years later when I was in the military. But that day put me on the path of hyperachieving and trying to earn the love and respect and make a dead man proud. And you can't really do that. But that's what led me through hyperachieving in the martial arts, through joining the military, hyperachieving in the military, becoming a Navy SEAL, doing 5 deployments in that arena, and then ultimately into the fire department after I had sustained several injuries and I couldn't do the job as a SEAL anymore. I had to find something a little bit safer to do. And that led me into firefighting. And people laugh often when I say that, but relatively speaking, right, it was safer physically, but not emotionally, because in the military, you expect a lot of the traumatic chaos that you're going to come across. But I didn't really expect that much of it in the fire department, especially growing up in Ohio in the volunteer department. All my family were volunteer firefighters. I didn't know that there were stations that had 12, 15, 24 calls a day stations, whereas the volunteer department might have that many calls in a year, not even a month. They might get one or two calls a day at best, but typically it was a call every couple of days. So I didn't realize the workload that I would be getting involved in when I got hired by the large fire department. I remember one New Year's Eve, I was on the ambulance and we ended up having right around the neighborhood, I believe it was 29 or 31 calls in 24 hours. You don't even make your bed, you don't even see the station, you barely get time to eat. And then to have done that for 24 years, in addition to the 15 years in the military, I just wasn't expecting the level of chaos and trauma that came with the fire service. And that really did exacerbate what I thought I had dealt with. As I know now, I just kind of ignored, we had a saying, ignore and override. I thought I had processed, but all I did is stuff it down. And those things got aggravated. So that took me on a long path of learning and healing, training and trying at the same time, and then put me into the work that I do now as a men's relationship coach, a men's personal coach, a mentor, and helping a lot of first responders, veterans, and other leaders, that are just struggling with who they are. A lot of people, and this might resonate for the people on this call, and you and I touched on that briefly a little bit before you hit record, but we look good on paper. If you look at us from the outside, we look great, but on the inside, we're struggling. Now, I remember we had a call, it was a hotel fire. And I remember talking to the chief afterwards, and it was kind of funny. A lot of chiefs told me sometimes, and Jim might be able to attest to this, sometimes they have to turn their back on the fire to run it sometimes because they get distracted by what they see, or more importantly, what they don't see. Because what you see doesn't match what you hear, especially on the radio. Your nervous system doesn't know what to do with it. Well, if what you see in life doesn't match with what you feel inside, or what you hear inside or hear from the external world, it has the same dysregulation. So this fire that we were on, it was a large multi-story, 15-story hotel, I think. And when you looked at the building on the outside, there were still people driving up, even though there were fire engines everywhere. It looked fine. There was no smoke. There was no chaos. There was nobody running and screaming. But on the radio, we had reports of smoke on like the 10th floor, 11th floor, ninth floor, the fourth floor, heavy smoke and alarms in the basement. We're like, what is going on? And the chief's looking at the building and it's like, it looks perfectly fine, but I'm hearing all these reports of this chaos. And that's how we as humans sometimes end up feeling. On the outside, we look great. But on the inside, we got all this chaos, all of this smoke, all of these emotions and things that are weighing us down. Now, what happened to that fire is kind of comical if you think about it. It was a conveyor belt fire in the laundry room in the basement. But a lot of the employees have propped open the laundry chutes in the hall because when they go there with all the laundry, they don't want to have to open the door and throw it down. So when the laundry room caught on fire, which bled into the kitchen, so it was a bigger fire in the basement, all that smoke was coming up the laundry chute and out those doors into the other floors. So nothing was really happening on those floors, but the smoke was there. And again, if you apply that to us, sometimes there's a lot going on and we don't know what it is, but we're feeling heavy. And the key is realizing, as you said earlier, you don't have to walk through the ashes alone. We're not alone, you know? And for me personally, I've been going through a lot right now. You and I talked offline. I just got back from Ohio where my sister had to go in for emergency surgery, abdominal surgery. And then she came out of that fine. And I was back there visiting. And then while I was visiting, I was trying to maintain my workouts and go to the gym twice a day. And I ended up having a pretty major car accident where I went through a stucco wall and into a tree and ended up in the emergency room for about an hour and a half and had to have a couple of things splinted and had to get 10 stitches in the top of my melon. And, that was traumatic. And then the next day, my sister had to go back into the hospital. So it just feels like there's been one after the other after the other. Like in the old video games, if you remember, it says mighty below. And that's what it's been feeling like. And I know I'm surrounded by great people, but as protectors, sometimes we forget to do what? Reach out ourselves. We forget to use the very tools we use with those that we serve with ourselves. The resources we send people to, we don't call when we need them. And it's kind of a weird awakening to sit there and realize, wow, that's exactly how I was doing. Some days we carry those emotions that we don't understand, the thoughts that we can't shut off, the disappointment, the grief, the anger, the loneliness, and we can't quite name it, but we're carrying it. So it's like you don't know what the feeling is. You don't know how heavy it really is. All you know is you feel heavy, you feel worn down. And where do you go when life gets heavy? Do you reach towards people? Do you disappear? What have you been carrying lately? To all the people that are listening, what have you been carrying lately? You've been carrying in silence and on your own. You know, Brene Brown has an amazing quote. Vulnerability sounds like truth and it feels like courage. But sometimes we misunderstand that quote, I think, because real courage isn't necessarily running towards chaos, towards the fire, towards the battlefield. Sometimes it's just saying, I'm struggling, but I'm here. And I think real courage is picking up the phone and calling a friend and saying, hey, I'm struggling. I'm here. And I just need some support because this just feels like a lot. And what's funny and what keeps a lot of us from doing that, I think funny is not a good word. I think tragic is that we look at ourselves and all the strengths we have. I know Jim was a fire chief, myself having been a SEAL and then a 24-year career firefighter. And those of us that serve, people look at us as the one to call, the one to carry the weight, the one to be supportive, not the one that needs to be supported. And I think that part of that comes into play when we're feeling heavy on our own and we don't know how to carry them. You know, One of my favorite quotes by Carl Jung that says, until we make the unconscious conscious, it'll control our life and we will call it fate. What does it take for us to be able to literally tap into those unconscious thoughts that we have and make them conscious so you can have a conversation with somebody about it? I don't know. Does that resonate?
I think that's why I love storytelling, because I do think the unconscious becomes much more conscious through hearing other people share.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing. But I think, again, I think it gives us all language and more insight when we hear you share, and other people share their stories.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's why the power of our story is so important because I think a lot of us, I would guarantee that all four of us in this call have had this thought when we've had something that impacted us. We've had these three thoughts. I'll show up when I feel better. Um, I'll talk when I get it figured out, and I'll let people see me when I'm strong. And it's the very people that you avoid that can help you feel better, help you figure it out, and help you feel strong again. And we run from them. this is the stigma that I think Power of Our Story has the power to break.
I think I think you're spot on about when you're struggling, we tend to sort of internalize, right? Um, and we cut off the connection to those people around us um, as we go through this process of, well, I'm not ready to tell them that I'm struggling. I'm going to sort it out myself. Um, and you go through that piece on your own.
Yeah. And it's funny, right? It's like this huge detour that takes you three times to get to where you could have gotten,
Right.
right? Had you reached out.
Yeah. The problem solves itself much faster in partnership than it does, where you can collaborate than it does when you try to do it on your own.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, right? Because strong people aren't people that never struggle. I mean, I've talked to some people and they're like, no, I'm doing fine. It's like heck you are. When you finally get them to open up, they're not, but they're not the ones that struggle alone. And in my opinion, the people that are willing to struggle in the light, suffering in the dark, those are ones they're really trying to say, I'm here. Now for the people that do struggle in the dark, it doesn't make them weak. It just makes them scared, alone. I mean, a lot of us grew up thinking that emotions were shame.
Yeah, you uh, that the concept of somebody that wears their emotions on their sleeve, kind of a thing. Um,
Hmm.
that was not something that happened early on, decades ago.
Yeah, and that was almost like a badge of honor, right? It was almost like a strength if you didn't. It would be so derogatory. It's like, oh my God, that guy's such a pain in the neck. He wears his emotions on his sleeve. He wears his heart on his sleeve. I mean, suck it up already. Be a man. You know, I remember being in the fire engine one day and we had a really gnarly call and it bothered me a little bit. And the crew, where they were talking about it, it's like, yeah, but it probably doesn't bother you, Rich. You were a SEAL, you've probably seen everything, and that doesn't bother you at all, does it? And I could have taken that as that's right, I'm the tough guy, I'm the strong guy. I need to be strong for these people. But instead I took it as an opportunity to be like, you know what? No, you're right. I was a SEAL. I am a SEAL, you know, and also that bothers me. That shouldn't happen. PTSD, and I know we talk about that a lot in this format, really becomes PTSD when there's a couple of things involved, which is one, your worldview is shattered. And in the fire service, that happens. There's like the terrible five that they call it, right? The the calls that are like, holy cow. One is pediatrics, two is mass casualty, three is one of our own, four is it was almost me, right? And then the other is line of duty death. And those are the calls that your worldview literally gets shattered. Five people shouldn't have just died, or those 20 victims shouldn't have been in that bus accident, or wow, the kid was only three. We had a call where two children passed away in one car accident. And yeah, I think one was 8, one was 12. And it, the distractor in this that everyone honed in on is it was the 12-year-old's birthday. And everyone got so wrapped around and just gave that so much meaning. But the reality is this, is a 12-year-old and 8-year-old just died. It doesn't matter that it was somebody's birthday. It's already bad enough. But what it is right, our worldview is shattered. That shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened to kids. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is a loss of choice and control. So, like when we're on calls, and Jim, you've had those calls, I'm sure you've had those calls as well, that there were fatalities and you had no control in the situation. And you feel so helpless. And that's what also adds to those signs and the hits of trauma and PTSD.
Well, and I
And
think
again, that's
I was just going to say before you get too far off of that worldview thing, I think that's where people have a problem is because uh, they end up not being able to relate to other people outside, like in the home environment, shall we say, right? Because the worldview is such that nobody else can understand it, right?
mhm,
And so then that leads to the further isolation. It's like, well, I can't, I can't unpack this with anybody because they have no clue, right? You don't understand this. Um, and so trying to find the people that you can connect with to do that becomes a challenge, right? And
absolutely.
that's where I think having a group where you can have people of sort of like mind, uh, similar experiences or whatever, that creates that level of safety where you can have those kinds of things, and your distorted worldview is then not necessarily looked at as a bad thing, right? Because
Right,
you start to present your worldview in certain circles, and people are like, well, "What is wrong with you?"
right. Well, you're absolutely right. And then, we have to be careful. I mean, I've I have made a few therapists and counselors break down in tears and cry when I bring things to them that I've experienced that I'm trying to process it, and it's overwhelming to them. We learn real quick who we can and can't share things with. That's why in the military and in the fire and law enforcement arenas, we really need to have what we call culturally competent people. And that's one of the things I like about the men that I work with and the people I work with. I tell them right off the bat, there's nothing that you can bring to me that's going to shock me, and you're not going to overwhelm me. I can promise you that. And they get such a sense of relief because they said, I've been afraid to talk about this for years, because there's people that can't handle it. And sometimes we take for granted our spouse when they say that they're going to be there for us, that they can be there for us, that we can overwhelm them. And there's actually a thing called secondary PTSD, where you sharing the story of what you experienced really overwhelms them and their nervous system, their sense of safety in the world, their worldview. Take, for example, just, that accident that I had. When I look back on it, I'm like, wow, that was a pretty crazy accident. I had to swerve to miss somebody. I chose someone's front yard and a wall instead, not knowing there was a tree behind it. And I went through the side of a stucco wall and head on into a pine tree. And I went from the passenger seat of the Jeep. I'm sorry, from the driver's seat of the Jeep. I ended up in the passenger seat of the Jeep, kind of wedged by the post and the windshield and stuff between the dash of it. And it was pretty gnarly, and ended up in the ER for an hour and a half. And as I've told that story to a couple of people, and they're like, "Oh my God." They're like even your eyes, Sarah. It's like I'm telling that story, and you're like, your eyes are like this, and Jim is just sitting there looking at the screen, you know? It's like it was a gnarly thing. I mean, to be thrown from one seat to the other and the via a roll bar to the top of the head and ended up having, to have 10 stitches and a brace on my leg. It was pretty gnarly. And yet it's not the worst thing that's happened to me after 15 years as a SEAL and 24 years as a firefighter. So for me, it wasn't that traumatic as it was to some of the family members that heard about it. I don't know if that makes any sense. But it goes back to what you're saying, Jim, is what's my worldview versus their worldview.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's again, I think the ability to relate to someone, based on some sort of similar experiences or, whatever is critical. And, unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, our family and most of our friends, you know, have no exposure to that worldview. And so it's just, you end up sometimes it can be a detriment too, because you end up locked into a social circle with nothing but people that are screwed up like us, you know.
Yep. I'm Googling something real quick because I'm curious to see what it says. Yeah. I would say the overwhelming amount of human beings don't even see a dead body in their life, right? A deceased person. That's why I remember, being in the car and with my wife, and we were going down the freeway, and there had been a car accident. And as we drove by, there was a body on the side of the road covered with a yellow sheet. And it was very impactful to her. And it's not that I am uncaring or don't care, but I was unmoved by it. I had the thought of, wow, man, yeah, that's somebody's relative or parent or sibling, but I was not viscerally moved by it. You know what I mean? And, there was an instance where we were going down the freeway. And it's funny, those of us in this career, either, what is it? Are we a magnet for this stuff? Or because we're in this career, we're always put in the place to make a difference. I haven't decided what that is yet, you know. But we were driving down the freeway to go see a friend at a barbecue. And as I exited, there was chaos everywhere. And I noticed a bunch of civilians that were actually holding a car up that had launched off the side of the exit ramp, landed on another vehicle. And they were holding it to keep it from falling because the driver was still in it. Two of the kids had gotten ejected. And I went to each kid and I was directing care for one of the kids, and how to put traction on an injured leg that they had, and doing some care to the other child. And the ambulance showed up, the fire department showed up. I gave them a turnover of what I'd done. They took over the call, and I was walking back to the car, and my wife was like shaking and crying, and I went to get in the car, and she's like, how do you do what you do? Because she was so overwhelmed by the experience. And to me, it was just like, oh, let's get in the car and head over to the barbecue, you know? And it's not that we don't care. And that's what, our trauma threshold, our fear threshold is so different. Have you ever felt that way, Jim?
Well, yeah, I mean, just what you were describing is, I had a memory of, one evening, my wife and I, um, going to an event, going to a dinner, something, um, and circumstances were such that I was driving the company car, kind of a thing, and we are going down the highway, and here's an incident, right? And so I'm in a marked vehicle. I'm in the middle of it. I got to stop. I got to deal with it, right? Um, Tell her, just stay in the car. Like I'm out there, running around doing stuff. Finish up, and like, okay, some people showed up, and I was able to turn it over and get in the car and go or whatever.
Mhm.
And And I did just that, right? It's like, just get in the car and go to whatever this thing we're going to, right? Like nothing happened. Um, and so, I mean, my wife had some background, so she was sort of, a little more understanding of it or whatever. But just that idea, right? That it's like, this didn't phase me, right? Next thing I know was we were at whatever this event was that we were supposed to be at, and I was just doing what I do.
Yeah. 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 There's been multiple studies out there that literally say that we have a threshold. Our body, our nervous system, our spirit, our soul has a threshold of allowable trauma that it can experience before it becomes overwhelmed and inundated. And back to what I mentioned about, the vast majority of people can probably go through the life without seeing a deceased, human being, especially in a traumatic environment. One of my first therapists I ever had, Dr. David Bond, love him to death. He had a talk that he would do, and he talked about people in the fire service. Now, as well as I do, Jim, there's big departments, that have 3 and 4 thousand employees, and there's smaller departments that have a couple hundred employees or less. There's some stations that might run one call a day, and there's some stations that might run 16, 17, 18 calls a day. So it is kind of relative, but the point to his talk was such that on average, your average firefighter or average police officer is going to conceive more trauma sometimes in a week than an average human being will see in their whole life. And now you add that up over a 24-year career, 52 weeks in a year, right? 24 times 52, that's a lot of weeks, and that's a lot of trauma. So if we don't have a way to let it out or somebody to talk to, it can become overwhelming to us. And then we end up isolating in our room. I did a post yesterday that I just wasn't feeling it. And I just wanted to lock myself in the room. I wanted to skip work. I wanted to skip the workout. I wanted to skip being seen. But I decided to do it anyway. Because one, I told myself I would. And two, I had to give myself something to believe in. And at that point in time, it was believing in myself. It's something that I haven't talked about a lot on here, but we have this thing we call self-trust, right? And the less you trust yourself, the more risk adverse you are, and the less you want to be seen. And self-trust isn't as easy to develop as people think. If you look at trust as in, look at the people in your life that you trust, it's based off of your history with them and their reputation. And that's why you develop trust with them, right? Well, your level of self trust is based off of your reputation with yourself. So, how many times have you done things that have let yourself down? And when you do that, you have a hard time believing in yourself and trusting yourself. And that's when you want to start locking yourself away. And when you have the bad days or the bad weeks, like I've had, last week has been very heavy for me. I will admit it out loud, that it has been very heavy on me. And I've wanted to just not share that. And then I thought, no, I need to be able to be supported as needed by people. And that's where the key of knowing that you've got that circle. So for you guys, and I know you do, what's your support circle look like? And for the people that might be listening to this, do you have a support circle? What is your support circle? And if you don't feel like you have one, my information's on the bottom of my picture right there. You've got one. I'm here.
There she is.
Yeah, my screen was going in and out. Yeah, I think a circle and connection is just so huge in life. I'm a huge believer too. The way that it looks for me, we have like three families that we get together with every Sunday. We've done that for probably almost 20 years now. And, it's not like every Sunday is super exciting. That's not what it's about. It's about that it's consistent. And we have all the things that go on in families over 20 years. There's a lot to go through with others. And then I do go walking and hiking, and I do a lot of things with friends and family. But it is that consistent staying connected. I have a friend that I talk to twice a week in the morning, and we even pray for people on the Power of Our Story. And, really do that. And it keeps us always updating each other and just really connected to I feel like, God, our creator. And so those things really keep me stable, amongst all the things that we get hit with in life. And it's huge. My husband is, he's a very outgoing person, but he's definitely an introvert. Like he just really likes to kind of be alone to work and create but he has been with his three friends every single Friday morning at 7 a.m. for that's going on almost 20 years too. Clockwork. So I am such a fan of that, Richard. I think it's so important.
I love it. I love that for you guys and for him.
Yeah, I think the there's two things that come up, right? There's that tight circle, those people that like Sarah talks about that, once a week with her friend or whatever it is. Um, I think those are important. I have my Rolodex of people that, get a phone call every, 2 weeks or whatever it is, that type of thing. So that and I just dated myself when I said Rolodex. um,
I caught that.
and um, you know, you have that, but then you have those people who you've had connection with um, in some form, that aren't maybe as close as you think, or they're not in that like close circle that you're engaged with regularly. And what I saw in my experience in January and February is that that circle becomes alive. Um, and those people, who maybe it's been 10 years in some regard, but that circle all of a sudden becomes alive. And those people, appear back in your space when you most need something. And they help you kind of get through that and navigate through that. And then, you know, a good percentage of them start to, drift into the background a little bit until the next time.
Hmm.
I thought it says a lot about you, Jim, and your connection and friendships with all the support that you got from that incident for you, that health incident that was a big deal, and
Right.
how many people just came out of the woodwork to want to support you because clearly they had a very good experience with you. It's just not everybody, there's a lot of people that we can't be friends with everybody all the time consistently, but
Right, exactly. But that's my point is that you're going to have that's that smaller core group that you're sort of engaged with on a regular basis. But in most cases, there are people whose life you've impacted in some way, in the past, that all of a sudden when something happens, uh, where'd that come from? That type of thing.
yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo what Sarah was saying too. And you and I had a brief conversation about this before. I don't recall where we were. Might have been at the VFW. And you talked about how overwhelmed you were by the amount of people that showed you support. And what I heard and saw in that was my respect and admiration for the type of man, a person you are, that those people wanted to be there for you. You know, how have you touched them in their life that they wanted to be there for you? You know, I think you even said it was humbling how many people showed up, but it was a reflection of who you are and what you've given.
Yeah, and for me, it was, I think I remember the conversation, because for me, some of these people were not people that I spent 30 years with, right? They were people that I was with for only a few years or something. Um, and, and I remember telling myself, it's like, well, I must have done something right because these people are here, that type of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, you know, and this is all around a great conversation because we're just talking about how we can support people, but how can we be supported as well? And I think the message that I want to put out there for today is that if you're not feeling it, it's okay. If you don't feel 100%, it's okay. That we just need to learn that it's okay to not be okay. And you're not the only person that's going through something right now, right here in this moment, that you're not alone. So don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed. Don't be embarrassed. And don't think it's weak to reach out.
I'm sorry. I'm starting to laugh watching Jim. It's like I'm getting dizzy.
Well, I'm not normally on my phone.
I'm just kidding.
I
Oh,
was thinking the same thing.
there he goes. Oh, I think these are great points, Richard. I think these are it is so basic. It's such a basic, important um need for human beings to have that consistent connection in some way. Always knowing that there is somebody, there's people that you can be very real and open with, that you don't suffer in silence. And I think that is what really hurt my heart when first getting into this arena is the pressure for our protectors to not feel that they have this security in being able to be open. And so I really applaud, both of you for modeling that and really making it very relatable so that it looks so natural for you guys to do that, that I think other protectors, it'll open their minds to thinking, well, maybe I could do that too, and giving them the language that you do. So I appreciate that so much.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, you said something there, and you said it's so basic. The need, the need to be supported. And I guess I'll just end on this. Everybody from the dawn of time, we've all been born with this inherent six core human needs. And I don't care who you are, they're there. To feel safe, one physically in this world and protected, right? As infants, that's what our parents give us. Even in the old archaeological days, you know, we were made to be safe by those that birthed us physically. emotionally safe. If we cry, somebody will be there. When you're a kid and you're crying, people want to comfort you, to feel safe, to feel seen. I see you in this, right? To feel heard and understood, to feel supported when you're feeling down. And then the other two are not related to this conversation, but it is acceptance and self-expression. To be accepted for who you are in that moment and to have the ability to express yourself without condemnation. If we as humans can give everyone we know those 6 core needs on a daily basis, what a better world it will be. But as you said, it's so basic to be supported, to support people, and to be supported by people. Basic yes, easy no. If Jim fell riding his bike, because I know he's a huge avid cyclist, and he broke a finger or his wrist or hurt his wrist, he'd have no problem calling his wife or somebody and asking for help, or going to the doctor and asking for help to have his wrist looked at. Now, knowing his background, he might have to get yelled at for several days before he went and got it looked at. But, he'd have no issue doing it when it comes to that. You cut yourself, you have no problem going to the ER asking for help, staples and sutures. But when we're hurting inside, and that's the permission I want to give people today, is when you're hurting inside, it's no different than when you just cut your arm. You just cut your nervous system. You just cut your soul a little bit. And that needs to be bandaged as well. And sometimes it's presence, sometimes it's a hug, sometimes it's an ear. But it's just as important for that to be tended to as it is a literal physical wound. So basic yes, easy no. And I just want people to know it's not weakness, it's courage to say, hey, can you give me some support right now? So I want to thank you guys for showing up today. Thank you for the conversation. And again, thanks to the power of our story for allowing this to happen and get this message in front of people.
Awesome.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Yep. Another good talk. Appreciate it.